So far, we've talked a lot about prayer. We've talked about how to pray. We've talked about when to pray. Should probably talk a little bit about why is prayer important. Well, obviously prayer is important for two fundamental reasons. Number one, prayer allows us to deepen our relationship with God. God longs to have a relationship with you. God longs to hear your heart. God longs to be active in your life. God desires to have a relationship with every one of us. In fact, Pope Benedict XVI actually said that being Christian is not necessarily about our choice for Jesus, but to have an encounter with a living God, with a God who is so active in our life that our whole life is changed because of that experience of God. Secondly, prayer reminds us that we're not alone. And so many times in my life, especially when I was a teen, I struggled with the feeling of being alone. And I believe that a lot of us who are looking at the video right now are actually going through a season in your life where perhaps you feel like you're alone. The most important thing for us to remember is that prayer reminds us that we're not alone, even when it seems as if our prayer is not being heard. Psalm 139 reminds us that before a word is ever on our mouth, God knows what we are thinking, God knows what we're feeling, God knows what we want to say. Before we can actually say anything to God, God already knows it. So when we feel alone, just be reminded that God already knows the deepest longings and stirrings of your heart. It's important for us to know that God answers our prayers even in the ways that God's going to do it that are different than the way we expect. Isaiah 55 reminds us that His words are not our words, His ways are not our ways, and God's going to answer our prayers perhaps differently than the way we thought, or differently than when we thought. That in the midst of the way that God acts, God's ways are different than ours, and so God's going to answer our prayers the way that He wants to answer our prayers. Finally, it's important for us to be reminded that we need to be patient as God answers our prayers. I had a great spiritual director when I was at the seminary who reminded me that God really never tells us no. Sometimes God might say yes, but on a different timetable. Sometimes God might say yes, but I want to give it to you in a different way. Or sometimes God might say no, and I just have something better in store for you. So it's important for us to be patient with ourselves and patient with the process. One of my favorite stories from the Old Testament is the story of Moses as he led the Israelites out of slavery and into freedom. When you look at all the different times that Moses actually talked to Pharaoh, and if you look at actually in Exodus 13, that God actually rerouted them toward the Red Sea. They were going a certain way and He rerouted them in that direction. God can be trusted because God knew that He was going to work a miracle in their lives once they got to the Red Sea. I have to be patient a lot of times too because prayer can sometimes feel like a battle. The Catechism actually describes prayer as a battle, and we have to confront two really important things about prayer. The first is distraction. Think about where we are right now, nearing Jackson Square in New Orleans, and all the distractions that surround us. Think about that sometimes our lives can feel like this. They can feel busy, they can feel crowded and complicated. Our lives can feel noisy. Whenever you and I are distracted in prayer, it's important for us just to be patient and sometimes even ask God about the distraction. The Catechism says that sometimes our distractions deal with the very God that we're praying to. And so as we're praying and as we feel distractions, it's important for us to give those distractions to God. Sometimes I think in life we might feel abandoned. Sometimes we can feel abandoned by God in prayer. If I look at my own life, there's been moments where the people who I've loved the most have let me down and abandoned me. And I bet that there are some of you who are watching this right now, and you know what it's like to be abandoned by the very people that you love the most. Sometimes whenever we're praying and nothing happens, we actually want to hear God speaking to us, but we don't hear anything in response. It can feel dry, or it can feel like we're alone in prayer. In those moments, when you and I feel alone in prayer, it's important just to be patient. If you look at relationships that you have with some of your best friends, I can bet you that you don't just talk to your friends whenever you feel like it or whenever you're feeling good. Relationships require commitment. And if we're going to have a relationship with God, we have to commit to it. So the encouragement is to hang in there, even when our relationship with God feels like it's flat, and whenever God feels like He's distant. But be reminded of what we talked about, that God is always with us. St. Paul reminds us in Romans 8 that nothing can separate us from the love of God, that God is always with us at every step of the way. So even when we feel like God's not there, He's still there. And He's allowing that period of dryness or that quiet moment in our prayer so that we can grow in our relationship with God. Those dry times have something to teach us. And if we ask God, what is He trying to teach us in the dry moments, then we can grow in our relationship and we can grow in prayer. It's important for us to hear that, because it's important for us to be reminded that you, my friend, have been born at this time of the church, at a very specific time for a very specific reason. You have been born in the church at this stage of history because God desires you to be in the world right now. John Paul II, before he died, he actually said that he wanted the teens of the world to let the light in their hearts shine for the world to see. You have been given a light. You have been given the presence of God in your life, and God longs for you to let that light shine. We need you to pray. When it's hard, when it's easy, when you feel like it, when you don't feel like it, we need you to pray. Make a commitment to pray. And we need you to be an image of Jesus. Every one of the people here are looking for the same God, whether they know it or not. Every one of the kids in your school, every one of the friends that you have, every person that you meet is looking for the same God that you are. Be an image of Christ so that the world can see God in you. And finally, don't be afraid. John Paul II encouraged all of us to not be afraid. God is with you and God is leading you. And the encouragement is to not be afraid of anything that might happen in your witness and in your discipleship. My friends, hang in there. Hang in there in prayer, hang in your walk with the Lord, and trust that God is with you.